Hello and welcome to another Thursday night Q&A. I'm very pleased tonight to be joined by my colleague from the assessment team, Chris Thomas. Evening, Chris, how are you?
Hi Sam, very well, thank you.
And I should say, Chris is one of our assessors, but one of the team that crosses some of the different schemes that we do. So great opportunity tonight. Chris does hazardous scheme assessments, renewable and energy scheme assessments, and our original traditional electrotechnical. So yeah, really good guy, very experienced, travels a lot because he does a lot. But yeah, so good. What have you been up to today, Chris?
Been out to do a approved contractor assessment today, so fairly straightforward assessment, although there was lots of sites to go and sample, so straightforward one. None of the elite schemes today, none of the niche schemes today, so tomorrow's hazardous areas, but today's just been an approved contractor assessment.
Brilliant. Okay, as with all our live Q&A sessions, I'll just run through some housekeeping rules. So we'll start off with our question of the week that we posted out on social media earlier this week, and we'll go through the answer together with the rationale behind the answer. And then what we'd ask you to do is please do put your questions into the chat, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, put your questions into the chat. Remembering that there's no such thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers. Please do also be respectful to each other in the chat, because the whole idea of tonight is to try and collectively help each other to improve our knowledge of all things PS 7671 and electrical installation. So yeah, please do put our questions in, put your questions into the chat. So without any further ado, we'll have a look at the question that we posted out earlier in the week. So nice short question, and it was all around prosumer electrical installations. So we posted, which of the following is not a main operating mode for prosumer low voltage electrical installations? And we gave people the options of, is it A, direct feed-in mode, B, shared feed-in mode, C, reverse feed-in mode, or D, island mode? So that was the question that we posted out earlier in the week. And what's our answer on that one, Chris?
Yeah, so this is one of those process of elimination type questions. As most people will be aware, prosumer installations are getting bigger and bigger and more common as the technology progresses. Obviously, your solar technology, your battery storage, etc. If you go into BS 7671 into Part 8, prosumer installation, just trying to work it out from where you would locate this information. What you're trying to do is obviously find where these systems would be named. So if you were to go into Part 8, just looking at my wiring regs book here to page 369, you'll find that 3 of those by the way, as well, guys, if you're not sure what each of those means, but the option would be option B. Shared feeding mode isn't mentioned, but if you look through those first few pages, starting from page 369, you'll find the rest of them have been stated, so therefore they are covered by BS 7671, but shared feeding mode is the only statement there that's not being stated in the prosumer's electrical installations.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, all the others are acceptable. Prosumer, of course, was something that got introduced in the Brown Book in 2022. So yeah, and we are starting to see it, you know, with the proliferation of new technology, lots of areas where we've got solar as in addition to a DNO supply, and then with battery storage. And we now are starting to get collective installations where people do have shared resource, whether that be shared storage or shared generation. So yeah, something that we're starting to see, and we certainly envisage that we'll see a lot more of. And as you say, it was an elimination question. You can see that direct feeding mode, reverse feeding mode, and island mode are all modes which are referenced within 7671. So the one that we made up and slipped in was shared feeding mode. Okay, please do put your questions in the chat. So if you've got any questions that you've been rattling around in your head trying to get the answer to, or if it's something that's come up today, please put it in the chat and we'll do our best to answer it. What we'll do while we're waiting for some questions to come through into the chat is we'll have a look at some of the questions that we didn't get round to answering last time because we ran out of time. So first one of those, common question to the helpline, if I'm honest. So on a domestic condition report, what classification code should be given to meter tails which are over 3 metres in length? And the short answer to this is, well, just because they're over 3 metres in length doesn't really give it a condition report classification code. The reason being is that it doesn't initially or directly make it unsafe for the users of the installation, which is what the EICR is all about. So as we've put on the slide there, because we know that the DNO will typically not agree to their cut-out fuse being used to provide overload protection to meter tails in excess of 3 metres, it doesn't necessarily mean it's dangerous or potentially dangerous to the users of the installation. We have to remember that the whole purpose of the EICR is to confirm, as far as reasonably practical, whether or not the installation is satisfactory for continued use. So just for the fact that it's over 3 metres wouldn't immediately make it unsafe. We would still suggest that there are some things that you would need to look at. So the condition of the meter tails, are they still fit for purpose and safe to use? Is the cut-out fuse adequately sized for the size of the meter tails so that we're not, it will protect it against overcurrent? Does the cut-out fuse provide adequate fault protection? Are the meter tails provided with adequate mechanical protection for the environment in which they're called in? Are they supported so that there's no stress on the conductors or the connections? And if required, are they adequately supported against premature collapse? So all of those things need to be considered, but purely because of the length, it doesn't create an unsafe situation. But if any of the above things came into it, that could result in them being considered unsafe. So yeah. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
No, pretty much summed it up well there, Sam. It doesn't necessarily rule it out as being unsafe or anything. I think a lot of installation electricians get quite obsessed with what I would refer to as the 3 meter rule. But as long as it's in good condition, it's being checked for being suitable for the installation, adequately protected, it's not automatically worthy of coding. Just a quick one, Sam. I'm looking at some of the comments on YouTube. It looks like some of the guys have got a problem with the sound at their end. I don't know if you getting any problems with the sound from my end at the moment.
Yeah, I've had our colleague in the background has also said that it's very echoey. What we might do is we'll try a headset. So I'll let Chris take you through the next question, and while Chris is doing that, I'll try and swap to a headset, see if that makes any difference. So Chris, let's have a look at one of the other ones that was held over from previously.
No problem. We'll go for question 2.
In an existing domestic installation, are 16mm single core tails adequate if the rating of the distributor's cutout is 100 amp?
Yeah. So with a situation like this, it's quite common for a lot of electricians to be quick to condemn it because it's not got 25mm meter tails, but 25mm meter tails is kind of like an all-in-one, all-encompassing size that we put in as a standard, which typically, currently anyway, because prosumer units
Absolutely. I think people look at it, don't they, and they think, well, 16 mil tails won't carry 100 amp, so there must be an issue. Well, only if the load, if the installation will draw more than 100 amps. So that's what we need to check. But yeah, people's sort of initial engineering thoughts are right, and that raises the concern then that they should do those additional checks. Um, okay, I do apologise if we're still having sound issues. Let's are people able to hear me at all now? Is that what I'm getting back from one of the colleagues behind? Um, okay, no, okay. Um, right, we'll try our next one. See if we get a bit more success. So another held over question is what should I do? Um, what should I do when I find that a TNCS system has a ZE which is much greater than the typical maximum of 0.35 ohms? Again, it's a common question to the technical helpline, and it's zero point 0.5 for TNCS, but we get the same issues with zero point 0.8 on a TNS. So the first thing we always recommend is that advise your customer to contact the DNO network, or with your customer's permission, do it on their behalf to let the DNO know what the issue is. Inform the DNO of the value obtained, and request that they visit site to investigate the issue. Now, they may or may not choose to do so because they may know, for example, that it's always been greater than 0.35, and they may not be concerned as long as it's stable. Um, so one thing to think about is that the 0.35 and the zero point 0.8 value and the 20 ohm value for TT, they're not actual maximum thresholds that the DNOs have to achieve. They're typical values that are given by the DNO to enable design to be carried out when the supply isn't there. So on a brand new installation, when the installation is being designed without the supply being present, those values are given by all DNOs to enable the designer to do their calculations to determine required cable size for cable length, etc. So those values aren't a hard maximum that they can't exceed. They are typical values that they give out for design purposes. So that's why they don't have to come and make the changes. It really is a case of them making sure that there's no evidence in what you measure to indicate that there's an issue with the network, i.e., has it drastically gone up in resistance since they last installed it? So that's why they may not be too concerned if they've known that it's been, let's say, as a typical example, that it's been set at, or being measured at 0.5 regularly, then they won't have an issue with the fact that it's greater than 0.35 so long as it remains stable. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, something we encounter as area engineers now and again is some people think these are kind of demarcation values in terms of deciding what earthing system are there as well. I think sometimes there could be, it's only a minor thing, but sometimes in terms of, sorry, I beg your pardon, it's only a small amount of people who believe this, but some people believe that it goes up to 0.35 ohms, it's indicative of a TNCS. If it goes up to 0.8 ohms, it's indicative of TNS, when in reality you could have any of those earthing systems with either value, you need to determine and conduct investigation to make sure you are actually dealing with the correct earthing system as well. So the value doesn't always necessarily dictate what the earthing system is. These are just industry practices that we use to kind of get a decent reading and stay within certain norms for any of the power systems that we work on. So if you've got a TNCS system, you could in theory have 0.35 ohms, you could have any value. So it's just to stress that it's not indicative of it being definitely one type of earthing system or the other. Further investigation and inspection will be required to determine that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, it's quite a common question. People get very concerned when it's over those threshold values. That in itself isn't an issue with the installation. Obviously, if the values for ZE go so high that it starts to affect the maximum ZS values for distribution circuits and final circuits, then it becomes a problem, and you would have to resolve those issues if you can't meet the maximum ZSs for your protective devices to achieve the required disconnection times. So that's when it really becomes a problem. If it's slightly over those design thresholds and it doesn't cause you a problem with maximum ZS, then it's just something to record. It is worth notifying the DNO, but it doesn't become an issue. But what you should do is the next time you're at that site to do additions and alterations, or you're doing a periodic inspection, you can check to see, has it changed again? Has it got worse? In which case there may be information that the DNO would definitely use and would act upon. If it's clearly getting continuously higher, that would indicate that there's a problem in the distribution network that they would look to investigate.
Absolutely.
Okay, another one from the question bank is again a common one since Amendment 2. When testing an A-type RCD, we were told to test and record the 1 times value. Do we still need to test and record the type AC RCDs with the 5 times value? So what's our guidance on times 1 or times 5 testing, Chris?
Yeah. One and also 643.8 also state several different values about different types of RCD, but ultimately they all state that you have to test them at their rated current, their rated trip current, and that would suffice from a wiring regulations point of view and an initial verification point of view, because Chapter 64 deals specifically with initial verification.
Yeah, please do bear with us. Okay, let's have a look at the next question. Please do remember to put your questions into the chat. Those are the ones that we'll be picking up when we've exhausted ones that were held over from previous time. So, question 5 regarding SPDs. Again, something that we're aware of. So, Regulation 443.4.1 SPDs and item 3. One of the engineers from last time asked, what does the NICEIC constitute a significant financial loss, and would this include consequential losses? So not immediate loss as a result of power, but things that may follow on, for example, from data centres, financial centres, etc. A couple of things to say on that. The first is that there's no fixed value for what is termed significant financial loss, or what the threshold in monetary value would be within 7671. And we always advise that with respect to the determination of what is a significant financial loss is to consult the owner of the installation, because what we may consider significant, they may not, or vice versa. What value we may not consider, they may consider. So it should be determined by the customer. The owner of the installation, we always advise, should be advised of the possible consequences of transient overvoltage due to the effects of an indirect lightning strike, and what the risks of them occurring, and the mitigating actions which can be taken. And it may well be the case that the contractor's estimated financial value of potential loss is different from those of the installation. We often get people asking about the cost of an electric vehicle that might be connected to the installation, which is being charged at the time, and that value may be excessive to the contractor, but the owner may have more than one, and so not hold the same value to it. So it's not down to the contractor to decide. We always recommend very strongly that guidance is obtained from the customer, the end user, but only when they've been made aware of what the potential is and what the possible consequences are. It is clear within 7671 that you do have to consider it, but it's not really down to the contractor to be able to form that monetary value. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, basically the value is in the eyes of the customer, and what might be valuable to you might not be valuable to the customer, and vice versa. Quick example I would use would be, you might have a risk to, say, an individual laptop or a computer or some sort of IT device, which from a monetary value might not be very expensive, but if that device contains lots of sensitive data, intellectual property, company details, things like that, that might be very, very valuable indirectly. So it's not just the direct financial consequences. I would add to it and say there's the indirect financial consequences to be assessed as well, and that can only come from the customer.
We don't expect, and 7671 doesn't expect the contractor to be a financial expert and to determine those. So it really is the contractor to explain the possible consequences, explain the mitigating options. So do we fit SPDs or not, and what configuration and how many SPDs we fit. So explain those options, but then let the customer decide whether that is outweighed by a small consideration in financial loss or a large one. Okay.
Absolutely.
Some of the questions that are coming through. The first one that is a little bit open, but I think it's something that we can try and put a response to. So very open. Can I use 2.5 mil twin and CPC in conduit? Few questions I'd like to ask as to what's the purpose and why we're doing that. But in general, no issues with using twin and earth in conduit. The only thing I think, in addition to Norm, that you would have to consider, that's a different installation method and will result in a different current carrying capacity than if the cable were clipped direct. So it's really clear that if we've got a cable size, we could determine the current carrying capacity based on its insulation flow. And if it were clipped direct, it would be a bit more open and free to be able to get rid of any heat generated by the current carried. Whereas when you're in conduit, that degree of being able to get rid of that heat is lessened a little bit by the close proximity of the border and the conduit. So that would be a factor that you would need to consider. But in terms of, are you allowed to install twin and earthing conduit, and for that matter trunking, yes you are, but you would need to consider the different reference method and the different impact that has on current carrying capacity. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of methodologies out there where I think a lot of electricians get it into the head that you can only use one type of wiring system for one type of application, and that's not the case. The guidance documents, in particular the on-site guide, also has plenty of information on that to assist the average electrician. Further to the information regarding current carrying capacity of the cable as well, just to add, if anybody's not familiar with it or hasn't looked at it for a while, you would start determining that by going to Appendix 4. You determine the reference method from tables 4A1 and 4A2, and then that would allow you to select the correct table within Appendix 4 to select the adequate cable size once you've taken into account rating factors such as thermal energy. Obviously, if you're occupying a conduit with a twin and earth, that's going to occupy a little bit more space than what you would have if you had singles going through it. So as long as you check it from a design point of view and assess it correctly, in particular using Appendix 4 from a design calcs point of view, or if you're using software equivalents of that, then it would be okay, assuming that the design characteristics are assessed and assuming that the rating factors are properly assessed, in particular for buildup of heat and grouping as well would be another one. I mean, I would ask a further question, say, is it an individual twin and earth, or would there be other cables in there as well where that could further complicate it? But Appendix 4 would be one of the main areas, and then there's plenty of guidance in the on-site guide on that as well, particularly with occupation of trunking and conduit type wiring systems.
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of if they are considering installing it in containment, then not only have you got to consider the de-rating factor of the containment, but like you say, is it a grouping issue as well? Because if we're going to put other cables in there, then effectively they act as heaters to each other, which again has a detrimental effect on the cable's capacity to disseminate that extra heat. So yeah, we'd be looking at a further reduction in current carrying capacity if it was in containment and with other cables.
Absolutely.
Another one that we had that came in earlier is, again, a little bit similar to the question that we talked about with regards to the 16 amp on a 16 mil cable on a 100 amp supply. We've now got the other way round. We've got a 6 mil ring circuit on a 40 amp RCBO. Is that fine? So from a current carrying capacity, it would be fine, because although 6 mil cable, we haven't got the information of how it's installed, whether it's clip direct or what, but if we take clip direct, then 6 mil would generally carry more than 40 amps, but there's nothing to stop it that it would it wouldn't cause any issues with overload. The question I would ask is, why are we using 6 mil? And if it is because we need the current that 6 mil will carry, then obviously a 40 amp RCBO could result in nuisance tripping when the load is just requiring that current and not operating in a fault mode. So yeah, normally we would size the required protective device based on the design current, so that's the current required by the load for normal operation, and then once we've selected the protective device, we'd select the cable so that the protective device can protect it against overload, but will allow it to carry the defined load, the design current. So although there's nothing wrong with using a larger cable, we do need to question, why are we selecting a larger cable? Is it because we need it for the current carrying capacity? In which case, then you do need to look at what's the rating of your protective device, because your current carrying capacity generally should be greater than or equal to the rating of the protective device. That's the general process that we go through for design calc. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, I'd add on to the first part where we'd need to know that what the wiring system is. I mean, I'm thinking out loud, things like new builds where there tends to be a lot of thermal insulation. So we'd need to know if that is a contributing factor in terms of rating factors, and then obviously selecting an adequate cable size. Another thing that might be useful, I know everybody learns differently and everybody's got different points of view on this, but I always find Appendix 15 useful as a start point for this. So it gives you the basic information of ring circuits and spurring off ring circuits, but it also directs you to all the relevant points in the wiring regulations, in particular all the sections and chapters of part 4, where you can then go into more detail regarding selecting suitable cable size and making sure it's adequately protected. So even if you've not got a clue where to start looking, I always find Appendix 15 really useful, and it'll then lead you to the more technical requirements like sizing an adequate protective device, sizing the cable, and obviously making sure the system's fit for purpose.
Yeah. One other thing that one of the engineers in the audience has talked about as well that I've not considered, but it's absolutely right, is volt drop. So often we use a larger cable than we really need where we've got issues of volt drop. So if we have got a very long circuit, so that therefore we've increased our volt drop on that basis, then we might up the cable size just to reduce that volt drop. So that's a really good point that one of the engineers has made. So that might be the reason. So yeah, at first look, there's nothing wrong with 6mm being protected by a 40 amp overcut protective device, but yeah, it's just a little bit more thinking, well, why are we doing it? Why are we using that size cable? Is there a reason that we've deliberately selected it, or is it just that that was what was there already, or that was what was available? So yeah, we would need a little bit more information, but volt drop may be the reason why we've got a larger cable in comparison to the actual required current, because the rating of the protective device should be based on the actual design current that's required for the normal operation.
Absolutely.
Let's just pull in because we're starting to get some questions into the chat now, which is where we want to be. So I'm just going to take us off those question screens. And let's have a look at some of the questions in the chat. So the first one, what would you consider the disconnection time to be on a solar PV under or up to 16 amp supply on a TN system, and also an EV charger, both uni and bi-directional chargers? So if we're talking about the supply to an inverter on a solar system, then on it, we'd see that as a final circuit or a distribution circuit, Chris. So we'd see it as a final because it's not distributing to more than one circuit or load. So we would see that as general final circuit requirements. So on a TN, then we'd be looking at disconnection times of 0.4 seconds on a final circuit, regardless of the rating. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Completely agree. I think in this day and age, and this is one of the areas obviously I assess in and deal with as an engineer, and I would say that we sometimes mistake new technology like solar for something being fundamentally different. The reality isn't. As I always say, a circuit is still a circuit. We just need to understand how the circuit behaves. So there's no. I mean, there are other requirements for solar installations, don't get me wrong, but if we're purely looking at that for that circuit, that final circuit, which is feeding into the inverter, let's say. Ultimately, it's still a circuit. It's still under 32 amps, so it's still classified as a final circuit. And then all we need to know is what is the earthing system. And as you said, we'd then be looking at typically the TN systems, 0.4 second disconnection time. There's nothing really fundamentally different because it's connected to solar. There are other solar requirements, but not for that part of the circuit that's being described. It comes under the general requirements of the wiring regulations.
Yeah, yeah. Another one of the questions that's coming from an engineer tonight is when carrying out an EIC certificate, would you state deviations on the certificate if the deviation was outside the scope of works you had carried out, but still a part of the same installation? So I think it's clear now in 7671 about if you are adding or altering an existing installation, you've got to make sure that there's nothing in that existing installation which affects the safety of your additions and alterations, because you can't continue to carry on with your additions and alterations if there's a known defect or omission which directly affects the safety of your work. And they reworded the regulation to clarify that, because some people wrongly thought in the past that if there was a fault there already, they could just record that in the box which talks about comments on existing installation. That was never really the intent. So that regulation has now changed, or was changed when it came to Amendment 2. So I'm just going to pull up that reg that clarifies that, and it's 644.1.1. For a new installation, any defect or omission revealed during the inspection and test shall be corrected before the certificate is issued. And then also the one that follows that, for an addition and alteration to an existing installation, any defect or omission that will affect the safety of the addition and alteration that is revealed during the inspection test has to be corrected before the certificate can be issued. So that's where it's down to the fact that even if it's clear that that wasn't your fault, if you like, it was there already, if it affects the safety of the work you're doing, then you have to put it right before you can complete your certificate and issue a certificate with the declaration confirming that it complies with 7671. Now, that was always the intent of 7671, but they just reworded it to make it a bit clearer. And so then that really does highlight the fact that before you start work on an existing installation, in particular for additions and alterations, your survey of the existing installation is so important, because otherwise you may inherit an issue. And then you'll get into that dispute of, you go back to the customer and say, but it was like that before and I've only just noticed it and I've got to correct it. And you know, that unknowing customer may then come back with, but you've given me a quote for the work and I accepted your quote. So yeah, the fact that they've clarified it now in Amendment 2 does highlight the importance of that initial survey, particularly when you're doing additions and alterations to an existing installation. It is so important that you understand what things you might need to put right before you can actually start your work. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, this is something we come across all the time in the assessment team, and we're always getting different scenarios that are posed to us on this issue, but they're generally the same. They get some sort of existing problem with a part of the installation which isn't under the scope of work. So, for example, if a contractor has been asked to install a new circuit, but they identify something on an existing circuit which doesn't come under their original requirement, and even though you say, Sam, the regs is fairly clear about this now and it's clarified it again, I think the issue normally comes down to the fact that a lot of our contractors end up going back to their customer and saying, look, this was the original job we were going to do, however we found this. And then also further to that, when other electricians are asked the price for that work and they don't mention this, then it almost looks like the original electrician is going too far with it, and obviously there's an element of price that goes with that as well. So I think it's even though the regs is clear on this, I think the main issue around this is the socio-economic element of this, where they've got the electrician has to go back to the customer and explain there's further work to do, which wasn't part of the job originally, and obviously the customer didn't expect to be there. So I think it's more burdensome to try and go back to the customer with it, as opposed to the clarity of what the wiring reg says about it. That's what I experienced as part of the assessment team.
Yeah, very much so, and it does highlight the importance of if it's an installation and a customer that you haven't got previous knowledge of, then you really do need to do that survey before you consider giving fixed price quotes, because that those two regulations make it clear if there's something there, whether it be an error or a omission that affects the safety of your work, you have to put it right before you can certificate your work.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
There is an engineer that's put in. Can we have a look at their question that they've highlighted earlier? So if I could ask that person to re-put it in, because we may have lost it in the melee that have come through recently. We are trying to hit them as they come. One of the other engineers has put a transformer has no neutral earth star, but the LV panel does have a neutral earth bond. And that's where it's conducted at one location in the LV panel. Has this moved the star point into the system? Is this now a TNCS PNV or TNS? So by the sounds of it, that does sound like a PMB, because it's got that single point, and it is quite often the fact that it tends to be those installations perhaps where they have got a HV to LV substation. They've got their own supply, so they're the only users of that LV supply. Then it's quite common for them to just have that single point where the neutral is earthed, which then does make it a PMV. So from the information provided, I would say yes, that is TNCS PMB, but we would like to just have a look at the diagram, and the best and obvious is to confirm it with the DNO, because they'll confirm. But that is quite common. We see on factories that have got their own transformer, and quite often it will be just a single point where it is earthed, which would make it PNB, rather than if it's earthed at multiple points throughout the distribution network. Well, that's our TNCS, that's our multiple earth. So yeah, it does sound from what you've said, but the 100% clarity would be and should be provided by the DNO.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, Sam, and say that because most people would expect that to be at the origin of the supply of the secondary of the transformer, I'd also just clarify that obviously all your drawings should be updated and reflect this if the star points effectively move further downstream, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to see the engineers supporting each other in the chat, because someone's made the point about the person who asked about a ring in 6mm. They're questioning how you would actually put that into the back of a standard socket outlet, which is a fair point to 6mm conductors. Generally, socket outlets aren't sized accordingly for that. Yeah. We're aware that you do struggle with 4mm, so 6mm would be really pushing it. We are still trying to resolve the sound issues, so I do apologise that it's not been great tonight, but we'll continue on. We've got a bit more time left. Let's just have a look at what else we've got coming in. So we can also have a think about another one that held over while we're waiting. So when installing a three-phase consumer unit in a domestic installation, and myself and Chris were talking offline about this, seeing that more common, as Chris said, in particular where there's large amounts of renewables, and certainly in areas where we've now got electric boilers, we've got perhaps aircon included, as well as battery storage, solar PV, a heat pump. So yeah, when installing a three-phase consumer unit in a domestic installation, can I still use 6 kA rated breakers, or do I need to use 10 kA, which we normally associate with three-phase because it's a larger installation? What's our thoughts there, Chris?
You're not necessarily, or the assumption would be if you're using three-phase that you might have to increase the braking capacity of the breakers. It's not necessarily the case. It comes back to design analysis, or just looking at the design overall. Chapter 43, looking at protection against your fault currents would be relevant here, because obviously we've got to make sure that any breaker which we size from a prospective fault current point of view is obviously going to be suitable for the breaker. So in other words, we need to determine what that current would be, the fault current, and then we'd need to make sure that the braking capacity of the breaker is able to handle that safely. So when you see three-phase, most people start thinking, oh, it must be large current demand, large loads. That's not necessarily the case, and it would have to be assessed correctly in the usual way. And Chapter 43 would help us to assist with that. There's also a little bit of information in Appendix 14, but Chapter 43 is going to be a good start point for that, to assess that. There are some exceptions to the rule where we can exceed that rating, but generally speaking, we'd have to assess it, make sure the breakers are suitably sized based upon the fault current, and then we would be able to determine whether we do need to bunk that up to a 10 kA rather than a 6 kA.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things about, perhaps sometimes we're misguided by familiarity, because we're used to domestic single phase installations having 6 kA rated breakers, and industrial or large commercial three-phase distribution boards having 10 kA rated, and it's really nothing to do with whether it's single phase or three phase, or whether it's domestic or industrial. The rating of the protective device should be based on the prospective fault currents, and that's what drives that rating. Obviously, you can use a 16 kA rated device anywhere where it's acceptable to use a 6 kA, because it's got a higher rating. It would probably not be economic to do that, but you could do it. What you can't do is use a 6 kA rated device where you need a 16 kA because of those higher potential currents, fault current, short circuit, and potentially earth fault that the protective device may need to deal with and still be able to operate after it's been reset. So yeah, there's nothing that says you can't put a 6 kA device in a three-phase board, just in the same way as there's nothing that says you can't put a 16 kA in a single-phase board. But the braking capacity of the protective device has to reflect the prospective fault current, short circuit and earth fault that circuit is going to experience at the point where the protective device is.
Yeah, most guys probably don't see a lot of three-phase consumer units in typical domestic situations, but as time moves on, as we were talking about off screen earlier, Sam, you're going to see this more and more as the renewables increases. I've seen it in other parts of the world for non-renewables, in areas where it's quite warm and they have a lot of air conditioning. But in the UK, we're going to get a lot more of this in the future, because we're going more electric with a lot more technology. And I mean, whether the power grid can hold up to it, that's another issue altogether, but that's out the scope of BS 7671 anyway. BS 7671, we're probably going to see a lot more of that in the future. Not immediately, but for anybody who's not familiar with three-phase consumer units and see that in a domestic setting, my prediction would be you're going to see a lot more of that as the technology evolves over time.
Yeah, again, we were talking before we went live about we were informed some time ago, probably 6 months ago now, that one of the area DNOs had decided that they were going to use three-phase distribution boards in all of their new build properties. I don't live in that part of the world, so I can't confirm that that's what they did, but that's certainly what they informed us, purely because of the demand required. So all of the new build properties in their area were going to receive a three-phase supply. Let's just have a look at one, see if we've got some more. So yeah, sorry, I do apologise that people are still having issues with the sound. It is, by the look of it, at our end, it's not your end, so we have tried to do some workarounds, and we will aim at getting it sorted. Any thoughts on EICRs from October 25 and the need for 239152? Just for those, that there have been some changes to EAS requirements, and we have posted out to our certified businesses. If you look on the websites and have a look at the EAS spec, which is hosted on the IET website, you will be able to find out a bit more information about that. There's no SPD with a new consumer unit replacement due to location restrictions. The customer informed and accepted it. Do we mention it as a deviation on the EIC? Well, so this is the engineer that said could we have a look back at their answer. Thank you for repeating, if that is the repeat of the same question. Ultimately, if you stated the customer accepted that there's no SPD installed, then that's meets a requirement of 7671. But we would suggest that that's documented, either commented on in the installation certificate, in the section on comments on the installation, or a separate document that you might create to confirm that they have agreed to not have an SPD installed, and then again there's no further comeback, so that if at a later date there were to be an issue with an indirect lightning stroke in that vicinity, then which caused an issue which you made them aware of, and you made them aware of what the mitigation that could be done, and they still chose to not do it, then you just want evidence. Because again, if it's not a customer that you've worked with before and familiar with, you don't know how they're going to react to that situation. So yeah, 7671, it's acceptable, providing the customer agrees. In that case, we always recommend getting some evidence that the customer agrees, so that it's not just a case of a verbal agreement that you might not see as being accepted at a later date if something were to go wrong. Okay, once again, it's always the quickest hour of the month, these things, and we've hit that time again. As I say, I do apologise if people have experienced sound issues. That is definitely at our end. Please don't go out and buy new speakers or start to adjust your PCs. We're pretty sure it is at our end, which we're trying to resolve and will hopefully resolve for next time. I just want to give people some information. So for those of you in the audience that aren't already a member of any of our schemes, we've got electrical installation based schemes, approved contractor, domestic installer, MCS covering renewables including PV, battery storage, hazardous area scheme, a BAFE scheme for fire protection. So if you do want information about any of those schemes, then do please go to the NICEIC website. Likewise, we've got some very good training offers at the moment, and there is a requirement due to those changes, as one of the engineers in tonight's audience mentioned about the revised EAS requirements. So yeah, training is something that's been highlighted recently due to those external events. We've got a couple of events coming up. One for our certified businesses. So on the 22nd of October in the Bedford area, Millbrook Training Ground, we've got a CPD day where people need to register in advance, but there's an opportunity to partake in 5 or 6 hours of CPD in one day across a number of sessions. There's multiple presentations and sessions going on at the same time, so you can pick and choose from those that suit you, together with some manufacturers and industry experts, both either presenting or providing information on the day. So please do go along and sign up. There's a fixed amount of space available because it is an external event that's being hosted, so it's not unlimited. Please do go. There's only a few weeks left if you are in that area or interested. And then coming up in the early part of November, which is roughly a month away now, we've got the final ELEX of 2025, which is at Sandown, a 2-day event which, based on previous years, becomes very, very popular. And people can both listen to some presentations. We've got a couple of live presentations going on both days, and we also take part in an industry panel along with colleagues from NICEIC and the IET to enable you to ask questions similar to tonight that might be rattling around. And having said that, just want to say thank you before we do disappear. Once again, apologies if we have had some technical difficulties which has made it difficult. Thanks to everybody who did put questions into the chat and who also tried to help each other by answering them out. It was really great to see, and that's the whole idea of what we're trying to achieve on these open Q&A nights. And from my part as well, thanks to Chris. It's always great. I was teasing Chris before we started in that I only get to see him about once a year now, but yeah, always really good, and fantastic experience and knowledge which Chris is always willing to share, which is brilliant. So any final words from yourself, Chris?
Just remember, when we come and see you on site, guys, we're here to help. We're not the boogeyman, and we try to come out and help you and assist you in your day-to-day activities, especially the technical side. So please send your questions to us, and when we do come and do your assessments, please remember we are there to help, and we're not there to work against you.
Yeah, no, it's a collaboration, definitely, and although they are assessments, there's an element of every assessment which is developmental. So I can honestly say we learn something, and you learn something as well, which is really
Absolutely.
good.
Definitely.
It's a great industry, and you know, it's really good to help and support each other. Okay, we've hit the magic hour, so thank you very much. Last time, I apologise again for any sound issues, which hopefully will get resolved for next time. And thank you very much for taking part and your engagement. Thank you.